topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, joining you live from Dallas, which is home base for me. If we've not met yet and you don't know me, I'm a management consultant and an organizational logotherapist specializing in activating meaning and purpose. My team and I help companies detect and articulate their purpose to thread it through culture and operations. We work with forward-reaching organizations to develop inspirational leaders who create cultures where people actually want to come to work and do their best. And we provide programs that enable individual team members and leaders to discover and unleash their passion and purpose at work to catalyze fulfillment, engagement, and productivity. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at elisecortez.com. Also, if you like the content of the show, you may also be interested in my next book coming out in March 23. It's called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. You can pre-order your copy at bookshop.org or barnesandnoble.com. Now, let's get into today's program. With us is Dr. Grace Lordan, the founding director of the Inclusion Initiative and an associate professor at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Dr. Lordan is an economist, and her research is focused on quantifying the benefits of inclusion within and across firms, as well as designing interventions that level the playing field for underrepresented talent within firms. She's the author of Think Big, Take Small Steps, and Build the Future You Want, which we'll be talking about today. She joins us today from London. Dr. Lordan, welcome to Working on Purpose.
Hi, Dr. Elise. So nice to meet you. How are you?
I'm doing better. No, I'm with you.
Fantastic.
Look at this beautiful thing that you created. It's always amazing to me when I love books and they overtake my house. I need another room for my books, right? My friends. But it's amazing to me when you think about what it took for you to create this thing that's out in the world, right? So hearty congratulations to you. I have a sniggling idea of what that's all about.
Well, thank you. And the best of luck for your books, which are forthcoming.
Thank you. I'm excited about them too. I really am. I do feel like I'm very, very pregnant. I'm ready for this thing to be labored and brought into the world. So let's talk about you. I mean, what you created here, it's interesting in that some of the references in your book talk about how you can really create, the career that you want. But I like very much, there's a much bigger application to your book. Overall future, it could be about launching a business. It could be all kinds of things, big, hairy goals, right? So when I was reading your book, I got very present that you are literally yourself a living, breathing, walking example of the success that's available when you apply the learnings in your very book. So would you say a little something about how you got so fascinated with this book or the topic of this book, why you wrote it?
So I've been giving kind of talks in corporate companies for about a decade. And in the very beginning, my talks describe problems that were in companies. So pay gaps, succession gaps, and then we describe some solutions. And the solutions were always at the firm level, essentially. So you'd need to be basically a director of HR or a CEO in order to be able to evoke the solutions. And people in the audience, you say to me, who were, in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, I enjoyed the talk, but you gave me nothing. There's nothing that I can actually do at what you said. So you pointed out problems that I have, and the solutions are all in the hands of someone else. And I really started to take that seriously. And I started gathering the academic evidence on success, and more particularly how you can control your own success. And that really was how Think Big is born. And for me, I am an experiment because I try everything in the book. And I'm really honest with the reader that there's no person who can give you a solution for finding success in your life. We're all just so different. So I really encourage my readers to experiment with the tools that I give them. Some worked for me, some didn't, but I learned what worked by really paying attention to whether or not the outcome that I wanted was changing in the direction that I wanted.
Beautiful. This is interesting, Dr. Lorden. So I when I'm out speaking to audiences, one of the things I ask them is, what are you passionate about? And so many people, when I ask them the question, they realize they don't have an answer, which is why I know they need me, right? Because I'm out to awaken people to their passion and their purpose. And so one of the things that I love about your book, the promise of your book, you say this book is going to help you take small steps to build the career you want, and it's going to show you how to do that using insights from behavioral science. And then you say, this is a key insight from behavioral science. Small changes that are actioned regularly have disproportionate effects on our life outcomes. What I love about that, Grace, is that it's so empowering, it's so encouraging, it's so enticing. And if that doesn't grab your readers by the neck and pull them up, I don't know what will, right?
I think what for me, what's really, really interesting is if you think about how you're spending your week and how you're spending your time, and the habits that you have today, that's who you're going to be in 5 years' time, right? And that's really what I'm saying to the reader, is that these small steps that you're making on a daily or a weekly basis to move your career forward will come to fruition, but it will take some time. It will take years. If you're not consciously taking the steps, however, you're going to be dragged, or you're going to drift into a career either by the economy or somebody nudging you in that direction, and you ultimately aren't steering the ship. And I think when it comes to work life today, because we spend so much time working, it's so important that you have a job, not that you love all of the time, that's impossible, but a job that you mostly love all of the time. And that's really what I want for people who rethink big.
I love that. I'm down for that, Grace. I'm down for that, because so much of what I'm trying to do in the world is to help create those cultures where people actually thrive. They reach their potential. That's so much of what I'm doing too. So you could see why I ran after you too. Once I was introduced to you by your PR person, I'm like, yes, I want her. Let's make it happen. So next, let's do this for our listeners and viewers. What is your definition of big thinking?
So when you think big, you really should be thinking about what you would like to do in the future with no constraints. So what can you imagine yourself doing? What are the jobs that you think that you would like? And then once you've identified those jobs or those roles, really looking at what are the tasks that person does on a day-to-day basis. And what's really fascinating to me is that people aspire to be lawyers, they aspire to be nurses, they aspire to be entrepreneurs, and they often have a very bad idea of what they would be doing on a day-to-day basis if they were in that role. So one of the core chapters of Think Big really is getting people to think about what are the tasks that you will be doing on a day-to-day basis in the goal that you've identified. Do you really now want that goal? So is this something that you would be content doing on a day-to-day basis? And if the answer is yes, setting the small steps in place to get practice at those tasks, which is fundamentally very important, but also exposing yourself to people who can give you access to opportunities where you're much more likely to get the role that you aspire to. And that's what I call making your own luck. One thing that's been really fascinating to me in my research is if I ask anybody about pivotal moments in their career where they got lucky, usually you can kind of trace that get lucky moment back to somebody who they met a few years previously, who put their hat in the ring, who mentioned their name in the right room. And that's really what I want Think Biggers to do, is to really strategically make their own luck by expanding their networks.
I definitely got that. And I know I've got a question here somewhere. We're going to delve deeper into that. So I also want to commend you, Dr. Lorden, on just the crispness of, or the structure and the contents of your book. So you've got, I think it's 6 chapters, or maybe 7 chapters. And I love how you offer, you write about your own stories in there and other stories, but at the end you have the 10 key behavioral insights that you're talking about, which are just so accessible. And then you have the 5, what are they called again? The 5
5 favorite behavioral science biases.
Yeah, the biases. And just, It's so crisp. So what I want to do for our listeners and viewers now is just kind of set up, because what you did with your book and how you offered it is, it's very smart and it's very well structured. So you say that the creation and maintenance of the big thinking goal has 6 steps that you need to work through to give yourself the best chance of completing it. And so I want to just quickly talk through these steps, which of course also comprise your chapters. If you could run through those for our listeners and viewers, because that will kind of situate the rest of our conversation.
Yeah, so there's basically kind of the 6 core chapters describe the steps that I want people to take in order to think big. The first is really defining your goal and defining your small steps. And in that, I give kind of some exercises that people can do, particularly useful for people who don't necessarily know what they want to do in their career. The next chapter is about time. So really focusing in on how do you spend your time? I ask readers for a commitment of 90 minutes per week. So really, even the busiest people should be able to commit to that. And in the chapter on time, I run through how to identify time sinkers, for example, so you can actually start getting more control over your time, and also comparing what you're spending your time on. Is it for pleasure today or investing in yourself tomorrow? And tools and hacks and how to change that balance. The next 2 chapters are on biases. So I first deal with biases inside ourselves. So really thinking about what are the biases that I have that might be holding me back. Anticipated loss aversion, for example, confirmation bias. And then I go to the biases of others, which was quite a hard chapter to write because it's the one chapter that isn't so fully outside the reader's control. But nevertheless, I really give kind of hacks on what you can do to tip your odds in the favor when someone else determines your success. And also, more than that, what to do if you're discriminated against or you face biases of other people. Then I follow that chapter by the environment. So really getting people to be clear on their surroundings, what makes them productive. Lots of hacks in there about what you can actually change in order to make yourself more productive. And I finish with resilience. The book was written before COVID, but it became extraordinarily relevant during the pandemic period and afterwards, now that we're going into economic crisis, and really helping people to preserve their resilience reserves and also how they can actually improve them.
Extremely articulate and crisp, Dr. Lordan. So again, listeners and viewers, those areas, those steps are goal, time, inside, outside, environment, and resilience. And it's just, again, so crisp. So what I've done, as you probably saw from my questions, is there's certain aspects that I want to delve into for each of those areas that I thought were particularly useful or unusually situated. And that's what we'll talk later on in the show as well. But first, I want to delve a little bit deeper into this idea of working towards your goal. You say, and I quote, "You will progress much faster if you meet people outside your normal circles. Decades of research and economics shows that larger social networks create more and better career opportunities." So you alluded to that earlier, but I really wanted to delve into that because there are certainly times, I am more extroverted than I am introverted, but there are times when I would really rather stay home and work on my book than go out and network. And your words are now ringing in my head. Go out, Cortez. Go. So thank you for that.
Well, I'm glad you're an extrovert because I'm an introvert in the sense of how Susan Cain describes it. So when I go out and I network, I feel very depleted afterwards. It takes a lot of energy for me and I need to recover. So for people who find it hard to network, I really, really, really sympathize. But yes, you do need to be creating networks. A challenge network is really helpful for people that is full of people who are different to you and different to each other, because ultimately they will see opportunities for you that you don't see. And they will connect a dot on what you might be able to do that you don't see yourself. So really what I would love people to consider if they're listening is writing down who are the 5 people that you would go to for advice if you had a bad career moment today. And then looking to see, are their ages different to you? Are their genders different? Is their socioeconomic background different? Is their college discipline different? And if the answer is no, really taking steps to bring people into your network that are actually different to you, because it's the easiest way to accelerate your career. You can be working really, really hard, but if you're not visible to multiple audiences, to multiple people from different networks, you're going to have much slower progress as compared to the people who have privilege, who have those networks. And it is a privilege to have a challenge network and people who are around you in your corner. And this is absolutely a privilege that you can go out and get for yourself.
I just got an insight as well from that, Dr. Lordan. So there's a two-way street on this, and or at least a two-way valve on this deal. So one, when you go out and expose yourself to different networks that people can actually see you, like, oh wow, you maybe you could do this sort of thing. Also, when you go to different networks that are different to you, you may learn different things and see other ways for you to apply or be of service, which happened to me last night. I went to the Code launch here in Dallas, and I was there to promote conscious capitalism, which I'm on the board of. But we got to actually see 6 companies pitch their ideas and then see how they ground them in technology. And I got some ideas about, what I can do next in terms of serving my audience greater. So, I love your idea of the diversity of networking. Go outside your normal fishing circle. Yes.
And your example is really an interesting one, because most people will feel much more comfortable in rooms where they have access to all the information and they can follow exactly what's going on. And if that's the only room that you're going into, you're really holding yourself back. We should be in rooms where people know much more than us, so we're learning from them. We should be in rooms where we feel actually we are the person who's the most stupid in that room in that particular
Yes.
moment, because there's people having conversations around us on a topic that's unfamiliar to us. And that's the fastest way to grow, to really expose yourself to new ideas, new types of people, and to be vulnerable and to ask questions so you get caught up to speed on the knowledge that they have that can fundamentally be valuable to you.
Extremely well said, and actually fits nicely into the next thing I wanted to queue up here for this particular segment. You make a very interesting and critical distinction in your book in the gold chapter between system 1 and system 2 thinking. So you say when we make system 1 decisions, they are fast, instinctive, and on autopilot. In contrast, system 2 is more deliberative, which is, I think, being deliberate about where do we network, where are we going, I think really speaks beautifully to that. But that was a very, very useful distinction for me.
And it should be said that we spend about 80% of our time in system 1 in this fast, automatic, habit-driven mode. And this really, really echoes the point in slowing down, pay attention to what you're, to how you're spending your time, and building habits that ultimately allow you get to where you want to go, rather than drifting because of somebody else's agenda. And then using that slow brain, that very, very kind of smart brain, to set those habits in motion, and then they go into the background of your life and you just don't notice them anymore.
Beautiful. Great way to take us into our first break. So listeners and viewers, think and chew on what she just said there. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with Dr. Grace Lorden, the author of Think Big, Take Small Steps, and Build the Future You Want. We've been talking a bit about the foundation on which she built the book. After the break, we're going to go into more detail in each of the steps that she just outlined before. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us. Before we get back into the program, I'd like to invite you to check out my book, the first one that came out. It's called Purpose Ignited. And I really wrote it to awaken readers to their passion and purpose and start them down the path of becoming inspirational leaders that can actually transform their companies and their cultures. And I use it for the basis for my programs, my leadership and my manager programs. I hope you'll check it out. If you're just joining us today, my guest is Dr. Grace Lorden, the founding director of the Inclusion Initiative and an associate professor at the London School of Economics and Political Science. She is an economist, and her research is focused on quantifying the benefits of inclusion within and across firms, as well as designing interventions that level the playing field for underrepresented talent within firms. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. Okay, so let's dig a little bit further deeper, because there's more to peel back in that amazing book of yours. There's so much, it's just chock full of things. So I had a hard time choosing which things I wanted to queue up. But the next thing I want to talk about, which you already alluded to, but I want to dig deeper in it, is in the time chapter. And I could so relate to this, Grace. I could so relate to this. I'm going to actually quote what you said because it's just beautiful. So you say, what are time inconsistent preferences? This is the behavioral science speak for the fact that most of us don't do things that are in our long-term interest often enough because we lack self-control. Self-control problems need tackling head-on when dealing with intertemporal choices. What is an intertemporal choice? It means you are choosing between immediate gratification and engaging in activities where the gains are a long way in the future, but the costs are felt today. That is so crisp, Grace. It is so, and if it isn't arresting like it was for me, I don't know what else to do here, right? and at one point you actually say, buck up, just buck up already, you know?
I mean, everything can't always be fun. And, you know, I think this is the, I remember talking to this, saying to my editor was saying, you need to kind of think of a way to kind of sell it to readers that they'll always be having fun. And we ended up, going with the straight talking, there's going to be skills that you're honing that are just going to be hard. There's going to be moments where, going to that extra networking event on, Wednesday or Thursday evening when you're starting to get tired doesn't feel that inspiring. And those are the moments that you shouldn't quit. Those are the moments that you should absolutely go through. I have a mantra in my own life that, when I set a plan, it's fine to change it. It's fine to quit, but I'll never quit at a time when I'm feeling low or I'm feeling tired. It will always be at a time that I'm actually feeling okay and I can make a rational decision. And I think this tug between our future self, where we need to invest, just like a pension, the pain is felt today. We can't spend the money for the pension. We can't spend the time on immediate enjoyment with respect to our future self. But it's worth it because, in 5 years' time, you can set yourself up to be in a place that's very different for you now. And for some people who are listening, it will be 1 year time. But the important part is to get going, to get moving, and to make moving towards that goal a very, very, very strategic and routine part of your weekly time allocation.
I'm going to echo that with a common refrain that I am known for espousing, Grace, and that is, you have one precious life, and you do not know when the exit ramp is coming. So, what happens is all too often I'll get there one day. I'm gonna, and pretty soon gonna is gone. So I love the urgency that you write about that. And I also, to that end, one of the other things that I found really interesting that I want you to expound on a bit, again, this is in the goal chapter, and it's around, managing the costs and benefits of how you're using your time and your energies. You talk about setting yourself carrots and sticks for achieving tasks that can help you see these long-term costs and benefits in the present. That's a fascinating idea. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, so this really comes down to carrots are incentives, so things that you absolutely love. There's really good evidence that bundling something that you don't like doing with something that you really like is a good way to get you motivated about the thing that you don't like. So, if there's something that you're learning that's really, really difficult, rewarding yourself afterwards, whether it's with your favorite show with a nice cup of tea or a nice glass of wine, or having a massage at the end of the week to because you've showed up for yourself a number of times. There's even stronger evidence to show, though, for some groups that sticks. So really punishments work. And that's basically saying to yourself, if I don't manage to show up for myself 3 days this week, then the concert tickets that I have on Friday night, I'm going to sell them and give the money to charity. Or what's even more effective, if you can believe it, is saying, I'm going to sell those tickets and give it to a cause that you don't believe in. So if you can imagine something that you really, really don't believe in, pledging to give it to that. And our ego is so high as human beings, and we want to be continuous with the narrative that we've written for ourselves. Pledging to give to something that you really, really dislike is a great way to get you to show up, particularly if it's a binding constraint. So if you have a friend holding the money that will be given away, or you put it on one of the websites that have been created for that purpose. So, depending on your flavor, either reward yourself, I would start with that. Then these kind of mild punishments where you're giving away perhaps some money, but to your charity, so you don't feel so worried about it. But as a very last resort, try pledging to something that you hate. And if you're somebody who really needs motivation, that usually does it.
Mm-hmm. That is really, really compelling. And what I found interesting about that, Dr. Lorden, is that, right, so many people will say that they will not let someone else down, but they let themselves down all the time. So I like that you've, created this accountability system through the sticks and carrots mechanism. I've never heard this before. I'm not sure I like it, but I think it's very useful.
But you are letting someone down. I think we forget that we're letting our future selves down.
Right.
There's a very real person, very real emotions. And it's a great analogy, friends in the present moment, or even friends in the future, we usually show up for pretty well, much more often than for ourselves. So really making your future self salient. They're a person, if the only person who's going to look out for them pretty much is you. So you should get on with it.
Agreed. And then yet another really interesting, very fresh, insight. I've been doing the show for 7.5 years, Grace. I think you're in episode 409. Had a lot of conversations. I read a lot of books, and sometimes I see some of the same material, but there's a lot of really fresh stuff in your book. And one of the other things I loved from the gold chapter is this insight of it's not all or nothing. And so you say, consider creating high, medium, and low workload aims for the activities you plan to do, so that when it comes to doing the task, you complete the version that best matches your energy that day. Small progress is better than no progress. This is brilliant. I've never thought about this.
human beings like to binary things. So most of us have to-do lists that basically write down a bunch of things, and we either do them or we don't. And as work is getting busier, people are going home with longer and longer to-do lists that aren't done, which is a really depressing thing. And one way to mix it up is to really think about, actually, for all of these activities, there are different levels of output. So you can think about low, medium, high as the easiest example, but there's no reason why you can't have 5 or more levels. And what's really interesting about this is that it leverages something called the compromise effect, where for most of us, when we show up to do something, particularly if we don't like it, we're very easily able to kind of flake out and say, oh, it's too hard, I'm not going to go today.
Yes.
Unless you have these low, medium, high levels of output. And if you just say to yourself, okay, I'm only going to do the low level of output, that's what I'm going to do today. Usually once you get started, you'll hit the medium level of output. And for most of us, that's where we'll stop. But that's okay, because you've made much more progress than you would have if you'd just shown up to the binary task list. And, maybe on some days you hit the high level, but always being kind to yourself that once you say, tomorrow is a day, I have a really hard task in mind, and I'm going to be happy with myself, whether I hit low, medium, or high, but I have to hit something. It has to be one of those 3.
Mm-hmm. I think that's incredibly compelling and just incredibly useful for somebody who I'm a pretty ambitious person. I've always got goals going. That really spoke to me, Grace. So one of the many nuggets that I got. And then another one that I got from the inside chapter around feedback, really, really compelling. What you say here is, you say, when choosing who to elicit feedback from, the best choices are people who will encourage your ambition and generally help you rise above any difficulties you might have. And also to ensure that they are diverse perspectives, like you mentioned before. But so in other words, this is not people that are going to just, say, you're doing great, don't push yourself so hard. But really people that are going to encourage your ambition. I thought that was really, really, really interesting, and help you govern and get through those difficulties.
And it's worth paying attention to the narratives people have around you. So, if you say you're going to do something big, and someone will say, well, do you really have time for that? Or, well, you've achieved a lot. That doesn't really feel like you. That's not helpful. So we all need cheerleaders in our corner. And, if you take on something big, yes, you mightn't get to the finish line exactly when you expect to get to the finish line. But having people who are there who are cheerleaders makes it much more likely to happen, and makes it much more likely that you end up in a place where you actually want. So really pay attention to the kind of narratives around. And I even say in the book, if there are people who are negative, maybe for them, you just don't share that much. So it doesn't mean you write about your life, but you don't need to be hearing. We do this to ourselves enough to have, so we don't need other people giving us narratives that are actually going to hold us back. So if you do have people in your family or long-term friends who do tend to be down on you when you say you want to do something good, it's probably their ego, because they're worried that you're going to pull away from them. Maybe just keep it to yourself for a while and speak with cheerleaders who are really in your corner.
I've seen that effect over and over again, and you actually describe that notion with one of the biases. What's it called when people do that?
When they put you down?
No, when they try to pull you back from your goals and kind of bring you back down.
Oh, I don't know if I named the bias. I talk a lot about saving face effect, which is related, where we end up not going for things because we don't want to be pulled down by individuals. But I don't. There isn't. I should name it actually. Now that you're talking about it, but there isn't a bias that's coming to my mind that's linked to that.
Okay, I'd be thinking of something else, but I found your biases really extremely useful to open up a lot of things. So, and then on that end, now still speaking from the inside chapter here. I think I might actually put this on my wall. You say, take responsibility and grow. Don't blame others or cosmic injustice for any failures that may occur. Take the time to reflect honestly on whether a lack of effort on your part or perhaps poor decision-making led to the bad outcome.
Yeah, I mean, it's really true, isn't it, that anytime something happens, we label it as a success or a failure. And nothing is a success and a failure in the way that we imagine. Whether I succeed or whether I fail is a product of 2 things: the effort that I put in, and also luck that I have along the way. And I really want people to get real about luck. So if you fail, maybe you've just fallen on bad luck. So then there's not much you can actually do but get back on the horse and repeat again. But if you succeed, maybe you only succeeded because you got lucky. And it's really important that you kind of take a step back and say, if I got over the line this time, maybe it's just due to the fact that I got lucky. So the next time it's not going to be the same. And it's important that you kind of up your effort levels going in the next time. So I really encourage people, for big outcomes that they've been waiting for, whether it's a success or a failure, to do a post-mortem and get really real with themselves about whether it was their effort, their responsibility that things went right or wrong, or whether it was down to luck.
I think that's incredibly useful. And then the last bit here that I want to situate here is this notion of, we're not a lone island here, right? We don't really achieve and realize this big thinking goal on our own. So in your outside chapter, I like what you write here. You ask, are you in the in-group? Developing relationships throughout the course of your journey is important. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. Invest time in developing weak ties who you can learn from and benefit from reciprocity. I know when I'm working with people, Grace, that especially when I'm working inside companies, is develop your network outside the company too, because you're going to need people. If for whatever reason they decide they don't need you anymore, you need a network outside that company too. So I think this is really important. If you could speak a bit more to this notion of developing your relationships.
Yeah, so I mean, most people think about relationships where people are really, really close-knit. So you'll think about, who are the people who I feel really close to and I can go and confide in. And I don't think that's right. The people who are the most successful have weak ties. So these are people who will develop very strong acquaintanceships where they might need to see somebody for 6 months to a year, but they can always call on them. Or that person can always call on you, and ultimately you will be there for each other. And I think in the workplace today, when everyone feels so time poor, focusing on building weak ties both inside and outside your company, and outside, I absolutely echo it, is so important. Is much more effective use of your time, and it's going to leave you feeling much more in control of your destiny, because we can have many more weak ties than we can have close ties. So I write in the book about a gentleman who I know quite well, whose team are all really tight. They spend lunches together and dinners together. And he just kind of comes along once a month, and they all really like him. They all really welcome him. And then he goes off because he has other things to do, other people to meet, and the family to look after. And he is more successful than the folk who are actually there spending oodles of time together. So paying attention to expanding your network, connecting with people in a way that's deep enough that you would describe them as a strong acquaintance, but you don't need to go to the level of friendship.
I just want to echo that as well. I had Frank O'Connell on my radio show a couple of weeks ago, and he's a long-time CEO. He's been transforming businesses for over 50 years, and he said absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt, his success he in part attributes to his relationships that he cultivated over time, because people would come and tap him on the shoulder and say, "Hey, Frank, you're the right guy for this job," because they knew him, right? Yeah. And so really speaks to being held up by a social network here, who people who know you, have seen your work and trust you, and want you to come play in their sandbox next. Yeah. So great way to take us into our next break here. Get people thinking about, who are you connected to and who should you be connected to. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've got on here Dr. Grace Lordan. She's the author of Think Big, Take Small Steps and Build the Future You Want. We've been talking about some of the steps that she recommends in her book. After the break, we'll finish the rest. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. One other bit of news I want to share with you is the anthology that I spent some time curating is out. It's called Passionately Striving and Why, and it's a collection of stories of 25 women that I recruited from around the world, from Australia to Zambia, who share their very intimate story of how they discovered their purpose, all the turns and twists that came along the way, and how they're now serving from it today. So it's meant to be one part education to show you the way, and the second part, of course, is inspiring. Come with us. It's fun. It's fun to work on purpose. If you're just joining the program, my guest is Dr. Grace Lorden, the founding director of the Inclusion Initiative and an associate professor at the London School of Economics and Political Science. She's an economist, and her research is focused on quantifying the benefits of inclusion within and across firms, as well as designing interventions that level the playing field for underrepresented talent within firms. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. So in the last segment, we were talking a lot about the inside and outside biases that you mentioned in your book. For this next segment here, I want to cover the environment and the resilience. So one thing that I thought was interesting when I read the environment chapters, I think most of us really don't comprehend the extent to which the environment impacts our health, our performance, etc. So you say the environment in which we live and breathe directly affects our performance, motivation, perseverance, and the choices we make at any given time. That's pretty profound to recognize that, because it's just, it's around us, right?
It is. And, I loved writing this chapter because it really was these easy tweaks that you can make that are permanent. So they're quite effortless, actually. So you've made them and they're done. You flip the switch, that really have been linked to higher levels of productivity and higher levels of happiness while on the job. And these are as simple as paying attention to the color that's around you. So it's been shown, for example, that blue allows you to be much more creative, whereas red is what you need for if you need to feel dominant, or if you're working on something where you need to be competitive. Paying attention to the lighting. So again, bright lights is really good for when you're doing a very strong cognitive task, whereas dim lights when you want to be creative. Paying attention to the air. So as you might expect, the better the airflow, the easier it is for you to actually be productive. Mm-hmm. And also paying attention to clutter. Clutter around you, a cluttered mind and a cluttered room generally tend to go together. But what was the hardest bit for me in writing the environment chapter was really paying attention to our digital environments, which tend to be much less organized compared to our physical environments, and really getting people to tighten up how they actually interact with digital, making sure that it's actually life enhancing rather than life draining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really found the idea of the color being quite interesting. I made a specific note about that. Red being much more focused, et cetera, and blue being more for creativity. I had no idea. You can see behind me in my books there. I definitely gravitate to the red and the passion that was part of it, but it's interesting that, but I've got the blue screen as well. So there's interesting combination. But the deal about natural versus artificial light was really compelling to me. I already know that I need that natural light. I thrive in that. I have to have it. I'm looking out my back window. That's critical for me. So I think about the people that are working in, sometimes windowless offices. What's the effect on people when they work in like a windowless artificial light?
So it's lower levels of productivity and lower levels of happiness. And it's actually pretty much the same size of effect as if you're in an open plan office, which also have been shown not to be good for business. And so many companies, a bit more reinvigoration now that we're using space in a different way. But even post-COVID, so many companies have these windowless open spaces for workers when they're sitting down and need to do their high load work. And it just doesn't make sense. People need closed doors with a window and with air in order to concentrate. And that's why I'm actually quite a big fan of remote first working, where for those deep tasks, you do get to be in your own home environment and to create a physical environment that actually can work for you rather than what the company thinks should work for you.
Mm-hmm. I have a client here in Dallas that I've been working with for over a year now, helping them develop their culture and their leadership. And they really struggled with this notion of letting people work from home, even a couple of days a week. But what was interesting, Grace, is that I know a lot of their employees well through the work that I've done. And some of these people are very, very introverted. They do their best work when they don't feel all of that interruption and the sound of people clomping along through the floors and people talking around them. They're much more productive, with being in their environment where everything else is kind of closed away. And the employer wins, right? So I also have very, very much found the notion of how hybrid and remote work has helped just in many ways in terms of productivity and life enhancement.
I agree. And I think, for companies who are trying to kind of reorganize work now, taking a remote first stance where they say, at the team level, at the function level, we're going to pay attention what's needed for operations, basic operations, and also what's needed to bring people together in those key moments. So, bringing people in for a deep dive when they really need to problem solve, be creative, be innovative, makes a lot of sense. And then dividing the parts and having people go away and execute on what they've actually come up with and made the decision to green light, and then coming back together has been shown to be much more effective than some of the ideas that are really starting to float around now, like the 4-day work week or 3-day fixed. So I'm very optimistic for companies that are approaching this remote first, both from a productivity perspective, which is kind of where my work started, but now because of my work at the LSE, also from a diversity perspective. I think that if you offer remote first working, you get much more diverse talent coming, because it means that they can set their work environment and their schedule around their personality, which is really appealing for people.
And speaks to, again, productivity. I do also cover this in my next book coming out as well, really about getting clear about where work gets done, not insisting that somebody's derriere is, stapled to this chair Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 or whatever, but where does it actually get done so that it can be more productive and fulfilling for the human being that's doing it. So very important considerations. I really appreciate how the world of work has changed in large part because of COVID. So really talk about an interesting silver lining.
And it sounds like you're doing some really kind of interesting work on the ground as well in companies, which is fascinating.
I like it. I'm having a good time. But then again, like you, I want the world of work to be compelling. I want people to want to come to work and realize this is where I become my best. This is where I shine. That's what I'm doing with companies to try to help them craft that kind of a place. So that brings me to the next piece here, which I really think is critical for us to talk about it. And it's the notion of resilience. You have a whole chapter on resilience. And I appreciate that the way that you situate that is it's not just coping with major life stressors and tragedies. It's actually just the ability to roll with the small everyday punches. And what I think about that, let's juxtapose that, Grace, with the topics of mental health and well-being, right? If we can learn to stoke our own resilience, how much stronger we are in the face of some of that challenge.
There's so many books that are written on the big moments where people, have bereavements, go through divorce, or have some other big life event. And there's much less written on these small moments that we endure every single moment of every single day. And I think if you don't get the small moments in check, your emotions are going to end up being dragged around by a plastic bag from day to day, depending on the whim of your colleague and the mood that they're in, depending on the whim of a driver who cuts through a red light and gives you gives you pause to shake a fist and be worried. And what I really try to do when I talk about resilience is get clear on those moments where somebody sends you an angry email, you get bad news, how you react to that, and really getting yourself familiar with, okay, if you are an emotional person, which I can be, how long do I need to take without reacting to focus on something else in order to put me back in a cold state where I can make a rational decision? Because I think a lot of the reasons why our resilience falls over is because we have these emotional reactions that we either internalize somebody's bad behavior and we never deal with it, or we externalize. And I'd like people to try something different to really get in tune with those emotions, but then always take an action. But the action comes when you're in the cold state.
Yeah, and I think this was important too. I also flagged this as a very important insight for me too. You say the next time you have a negative encounter, remind yourself of fundamental attribution error. It may help you downgrade the encounter so it doesn't affect your mood. In other words, reevaluate it, put it in its place, if you will.
Because I guess if you imagine yourself coming to work today and getting splashed by somebody and you're soaking from head to toe.
Right.
And, most of us, when that happens, we would tell our colleagues, we would be angry, it would play in our minds. We might even use some curse words, depending on our personality. But then if I said to you, actually, the person driving the car, their partner has cancer and they're really, really sick. And they've been told that this is kind of the last moments and they're not thinking, or that the person is unemployed for a long time and they have a shot at a job and the traffic has been worse than expected this morning because of roadworks and now they're slightly late. Most of us would say, okay, it wasn't great to get soaked, but I get it. And I think when we do that for ourselves, so when we have bad behavior or when we let ourselves down, we're very quick to bring into it the narrative of the context, what was happening around me, and explaining my behavior. And we never do that for strangers. So if somebody is late for an interview, late for a meeting, the rapport isn't so good on an online exchange for an interview, we tend to blame the person, but not necessarily take into account the context. Maybe they have poor internet. Maybe they had a big life event that caused them to be late. So again, for me, I guess if you were to kind of summarize this, you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. You shouldn't really internalize first impressions. And I'm definitely somebody for giving second chances.
Mm-hmm. I really love that, Grace. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, listeners and viewers, it's not all about you.
Yes.
And I'm absolutely totally guilty of this, but I really love it when you say, giving people second chances and opportunities to clear up misunderstandings is one of the kindest things we can do as human beings.
Yeah, I know. I think in today's society, when people are time poor, when the economy is so turbulent, and a lot of people are really kind of suffering through this cost of living crisis, being kind, taking that extra moment, and going for forgiveness if somebody pulls into that parking space in front of you isn't just good for that individual. They've gone away with their lives while you're still worrying about it, and your resilience is going down. So it's not just about them. This is about you, and kind of really reimagining the toll that these quick reactions, these bad reactions that we have to people who kind of slight us, is having on us internally, our mental well-being, and ultimately our resilience.
And let's then take it one step higher then, and all of that is completely within our control to stop doing that, right? It's totally within our control to not allow ourselves to fall victim to that sort of judgment and, oh, woe is me and the world is doing this to me kind of thing. And again, that goes back to, it's not all about you. And I really find that that's such an empowering perspective, Grace, for us to be able to leave our listeners and viewers with, and it expands and opens.
No, I absolutely agree. And the one thing that we didn't cover that I would love to mention quickly, if I may, is the spotlight effect, which is related to what we're talking about, the fundamental attribution error, which really illustrates that people hold themselves back from putting themselves forward for public speaking, for a job, for an opportunity, because they're afraid of messing up and ultimately what other people will say when they're in the spotlight. And the spotlight effect really shows, actually, most of the time people aren't paying attention to you, because as you say, you're not the only one in the world. And if you do mess up, the people who do notice you will tend to have empathy. So I think for anybody who's thinking about kind of maybe doing something pivotal in their life, I would love them to rethink big. But if you don't, remember the spotlight effect when you're getting nervous about taking an opportunity. The chances of you doing something negative and lots of people noticing are really, really small.
That is a beautiful way to finish the show, but we do have time to let you finish one if you want to say anything else. This show is listened to by people around the world. We're out to create a workplace where people actually want to come to work and do their best. We create those inspirational leaders that lead them to their greatness, and we do business that betters the world. What would you like to leave us with today?
Oh, I would love people to really remember that small changes have disproportionate effects. So whether you're a team leader and you change how you run your meetings, or whether you're an individual striving in your career and you just change how you allocate your time, what you're doing today, tomorrow, and next week will ultimately determine where you are in 5 years' time. And really just create good habits. Really create good habits to set yourself up for success.
Dr. Grace Lordan, I'm very happy to know you and share with my listeners and viewers. You are a gift. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Dr. Cortez. It's been a privilege. Bye.
Listeners and viewers, if you want to learn more about Dr. Grace Lordan, her work or her book, go to gracelordan.com. Lordan is spelled Lordan. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We were on the air with Alden Mills, three-time Navy SEAL platoon commander and longtime entrepreneur, talking about his book, Unstoppable Teams, the 4 Essential Actions of High-Performance Leadership. Next week, we'll be on the air with Bill Murphy, sharing insights about connecting passion and purpose and finding your why in work through his book called Thriving in the Storm. See you there. Remember that work is at least a third of our lives and is an integral and important part of our lives, and can be one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.